Okay, in this session we're going to look at the process of educational supervision. In other words, we're going to concentrate on the art of facilitating the session, the educational climate of the session, and the relationship between you and the trainee, and so on. But let's not forget about the purpose, i.e. what the sessions are all about. We're trying to identify areas for development, we're trying to motivate them, we're trying to keep them on track. And ultimately, what we're really trying to do is help them to become a good enough doctor as defined by the 12 RCGP formulated professional competencies. And just to remind you about the definition so you haven't forgotten, just have a quick read of this again. Remember, it's a positive forward-looking process designed to help the learner develop, highlighting their strengths and weaknesses, identifying ways they can develop, and ultimately to keep them on track for their training. In terms of the educational supervision process, what are we really aiming for? Well, this is better illustrated through pictures rather than just talking about it. So I'm going to show you some pictures of what we are trying to achieve and what we are definitely trying to avoid. I'm just going to flick through them. Actually, let's start off with the negative. Here are some pictures that illustrate what you are definitely not after. If you end up with a trainee displaying these sorts of things, it generally means you need to reset the educational climate and refocus the session on building the relationship with your trainee. I'm not going to say much as we look through these pictures, and the main reason for that is because they speak for themselves. Anyway, let's start. Gosh, what a face. Another face. Remember, these are the types of things that we're trying to avoid. Gosh, what a baby. If you've got something like this, it really does mean that you need to go back to working on the relationship again. As does this one. But I do like her face. Remember what I said at the start about having a trainee who shows some of these negative reactions. It doesn't mean that you throw in the towel. Instead, reset the educational climate and rebuild the relationship between you and the trainee. Just start to talk to the trainee. The first step is just to talk to each other about it and see how you can mend the relationship. 90% of the time, things are fixable. But one of you has to pluck up the courage to verbalise what you're seeing, feeling or hearing. And I suggest that be you, because you're meant to be the maturer one. Actually, the only time when you need to throw in the towel is when you've got a trainee who's showing expressions like the one you can see in this slide. I mean, you don't need to be a body language expert to tell that you and them are just simply not going to get on and it's irrecoverable. In this sort of situation, get in touch with your program director. It would seem the best option would be to both of you to part and go your different ways, and to accept that there's been a personality clash or something going on. Now let's move on to more positive pictures and see what we are really after. And then we'll talk about how you might go about getting this. Again, I'm not going to say much, but instead I'm just going to allow you to absorb the pictures. So the question is, how do we get to the positive strokes? How do we create this positive climate, this positive relationship? Well, it's all about three things. The first is finding that locus within yourself to really want to help the other person. It's what I call your desire for contribution. We all actually have it, it's just a matter of finding it. The second thing is to create a safe, positive educational climate. And the third thing is to treat the learner as a person. Now, I can't help you find your locus. You need to do that yourself. But I can help you with the other two things. So let's start talking about creating a safe educational climate in a bit more detail. Now, there are two main things that I can think of that help determine the degree of positivity in an educational climate. These are the IHOP principles and being prepared. Now, I won't talk too much about the IHOP principles because they're generally self-explanatory. The IHOP principles are integrity, honesty, openness and trust. For example, if you had a mate who you later thought was quite dishonest about a lot of things, would that enhance your relationship or would the relationship get worse? Need I say more? As for being prepared, in that I'm including things like trying to choose a quiet and pleasant location to do the meeting. You may even consider going somewhere away from work, for instance, and I would strongly advise that. In that I'm also including setting some protected time to do the educational supervision without interruption. That in a way kind of shows that you respect the process. Also, in being prepared, I'm including things like familiarising yourself with the e-portfolio so that most of the educational supervision meeting is dedicated to educational supervision and the person in front of you rather than a computer training session on the e-portfolio. In order to treat the learner as a person, there are three things that you can do. The first is to adopt a person-centered approach, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The other things that you can do is pay attention to your consultation and communication skills to make sure that they're on an adult level. And the other thing is to work on your feedback skills to make sure that they're really damn good. Because one thing for certain is the way that you give feedback really affects whether it's going to be accepted or rejected. There are three things I'd like to talk about that can help you adopt a more person-centered approach The first is respect, and by that I mean treating them as a fellow human being rather than on some sort of hierarchical divide where you're the teacher and they're the apprentice. What is also important is liking them. So it's important you do try to get to know them, their personal interests, and try to have a laugh with them. What you mustn't be is be too judgmental early on. If you find that you haven't actually developed anything special with your trainee, then what you might want to do is spend some time having a general chit chat and trying to find that something special that you really do like about them. Most people have something that we really like about them. And the final thing is compassion, showing compassion where it's due. Now, giving feedback is an art and a skill, and therefore that means it needs practice. There are various feedback models out there. Go and read about them and then play with them. I really can't stress how the way you give feedback is crucial to its acceptance. Actually, both the learner and the supervisor should be familiar with the principles of feedback. I always spend quite a bit of time with my supervisee discussing the theory behind feedback so we have a common understanding about its purpose. My aim is to really hook them into feedback so they automatically say they want more. To do this, I emphasize the point that feedback is all about trying to make them even better than they already are. And then I ask them whether they're up for that. And generally, I would encourage them to accept the feedback they are given and to remember that difficult feedback may not have been easy for the person to give. There's a really good handout on our website, www.bradfordvts.co.uk. Just click on the Educational Supervision icon and then on Feedback, and then click on the handout for the trainees. Anyway, if you're on YouTube, click the pause button if you want to read this slide in a bit more detail. Don't worry if you've never done any sort of educational supervision before. All you have to do is these 4 things: listen, reflect, support, and counsel. Actually, you probably do most of these things on a daily basis with family and friends. And I know you definitely do them with patients. So in a way, many of you will be experts already. In terms of listening, eyes and brain open, mouth shut. Don't interrupt, don't dominate, don't prejudge. Just have a quick read through this slide by yourself. Hit the pause button. You've probably come across this slide before. It basically lists all the skills that are required for effective educational supervision. The supervisor is not the learner's personal counsellor, nor their GP. I know I've talked about being person-centred and all of that, but remember, you're there to help them, not necessarily problem solve for them. So if a trainee, for example, is displaying signs and symptoms of depression, I do not throw off my educational supervisor's hat for the doctor's hat. Instead, I refer them onto their own GP and get occupational health involved. Remember, you do not step into territory that you have no right to be in. Finally, here's a quick thing about standards that I'd like you to read in your own time. Bye for now.